Welcome, my name is Evan Raper and I'm presenting this seminar for the EDC4000 course for the University of Southern Queensland. Diving straight in, the issue I would like to explore today concerns an ever-present facet of a teacher's classroom experience, behaviour management. More specifically, I'm going to discuss oppositional defiance and present a plan for promoting task engagement and best educational outcomes for a student who presents with such behaviour. In developing this topic, I have chosen to draw on a challenging experience I encountered whilst on practicum for this degree. In a primary school class of 28 students, there was a single student who presented as oppositional defiant. This behaviour seriously hampered my teaching. Explicit teaching episodes were constantly interrupted, affecting the lesson flow. Silly noises distracted otherwise engaged students. Argumentative responses seemed to challenge my implicit role as the teacher. Class activities were difficult. Group work became especially fraught. Equipment and resources went missing or became mysteriously broken. In essence, task engagement was reduced across the class. Lesson outcomes were not being met due to the time lost in dealing with this single student. As noted by Cumming-Potvin, schooling is expected to be socially just and not influenced negatively by discrimination through sex, language, culture, ethnicity, religion, or disability. This was clearly a social justice issue as the student was being disadvantaged by a disability outside of their control, that is, their oppositional defiant behaviour. The student was wholly unable to engage with material and activity presented to the class. This student was not being afforded the most fair and reasonable opportunities to achieve the best educational outcome for them. Further to this, the effects of the time spent on and the disruption caused by the single student had a flow-on effect to all students in the room. Thereby, all students were being disadvantaged as their opportunities to an equitable and accessible education were being impaired. As teachers, it is vital we consider matters of social justice and provide the best opportunities to an equitable and accessible education. Indeed, this very notion is enshrined in the Melbourne Declaration in the first of its two goals. Namely, Australian schooling provides equity and excellence. This social justice issue has weighty implications when considered in light of the Australian professional standards for teachers. It can be shown that dealing with oppositional defiant behaviour straddles all three of the domains of teaching under which the standards are grouped. For example, in the professional knowledge domain, it is vital one is cognizant of differentiated teaching strategies for students across both the full range of abilities as well as disabilities. Differentiating both instruction and task for an oppositional defiant student is a vital strut in providing the best opportunity for that student to access learning. In addition, knowledge of strategies to support students with learning difficulties or similar disabilities is particularly necessary to provide equitable and fair opportunities for engagement and learning. Applying standards from the professional practice domain of particular relevance to an oppositional defiant student is Standard 4. All 5 focus areas are of relevance, but supporting student participation and managing classroom activities and challenging behaviour are again key. Creating and maintaining a supportive and safe learning environment is very important in providing an oppositional defiant student the best opportunities to engage and access learning. In consideration of the professional engagement domain in relation to an oppositional defiant student, ultimately, both standards 6 and 7 must be implemented to meet Focus Area 6.4. Collaboratively and ethically engaging with colleagues, undertaking professional learning to improve your knowledge of and practice in dealing with difficult behaviours, including parents and carers in the development of appropriate behaviour and learning strategies, must all take place with the sole aim of improving student learning. When developing a plan for dealing with an oppositional defiant student, it is best to first get a picture of what exactly we're dealing with. Oppositional defiant disorder, or ODD, is one of the 3 main disruptive behaviours often described as challenging behaviours, the other 2 being hostile-aggressive behaviour, often manifesting as a conduct disorder, and passive-aggressive behaviour. In reviewing international research, Sanders, Gooley and Nicholson reported in 2000 that the prevalence of ODD ranged from between 6 to 10%. A later 2005 study in the US by Kessler and others confirms these data, finding that the lifetime prevalence of oppositional defiant disorder to be 8.5% of the population. Having a plan to deal with such behaviours would therefore seem to be a pertinent task. Students who present as oppositional defiant have a blatant resistance to authority. They can display anger and spitefulness. They're easily annoyed and lose their tempers frequently. They can be smart and cheeky. They lie. They deliberately break school rules and annoy classmates, and they purposely destroy or deface school property. The next big issue is how to deal with ODD. Much of the behaviour management strategies utilised today draw from a cognitive behavioural perspective. This approach assumes that cognitive content and processes can be known, and perhaps more importantly for our discussion, that such cognitions can be intentionally targeted and modified. In simplified terms, this perspective suggests that students have much more say in how they choose to behave. This has led to the development of the person-centred approach to classroom management. The classroom modelled on the person-centred approach has a focus upon self-discipline. As outlined by Freiberg, rather than a teacher-centred focus, a person-centred approach promotes shared leadership, community building, and a realisation of the necessity to find a balance between the needs of teachers and students. Person or student-centred management is still prone to criticism. Garrett suggests that student-centred management and student-centred instruction, as based on constructivist principles of learning, are not separate entities, and that an educator who utilises teacher-centred pedagogy may find a student-centred behaviour management approach unsupportive. This would seem to be a fair criticism. In utilising a person-centred approach in determining behaviour management strategies, especially in dealing with the challenging behaviours, the aim is to assist students to behave in an appropriate and pro-social manner, to make the right choices for their behaviour. Through the use of proactive strategies, students can be taught appropriate and positive responses to challenging circumstances. In reference to ODD students, proactive plans and strategies can be deployed, with the student to identify the behaviour triggers and emotional and physiological responses that escalate behaviour episodes, as well as providing a pre-arranged system of visual cues and outs to provide clear communication, mechanisms to de-escalate, and non-consequence exits. The person-centred approaches, focusing upon helping students use self-discipline and develop appropriate pro-social behaviours, has resulted in positive behaviour support programs, PBS, often referred to as school-wide PBS, becoming an increasingly visible feature of Australian schools. Critics of PBS approaches say that the methodologies utilised by its proponents likely reflect personal opinions and impressions, beliefs which are prone to considerable outside variance. As such, they do not yield credible, reliable evidence about either changes in behaviour or what is likely responsible for any demonstrable change. While I would not argue with the veracity of these charges or the quasi-scientific nature of applying an action research plan as espoused by Barry in a classroom, I nonetheless do see benefits in terms of both professional development and improving pedagogical practice. Like much else in the classroom, appropriate behaviour must be taught. As proffered by Charles, teachers can achieve this by assisting students through establishing, teaching, enforcing and reinforcing clear behaviour expectations through a code of conduct. This supports students with challenging behaviours, if not in fact all students, as it serves to reduce anxiety and confusion as to what is expected of them. This can be accomplished through involving students in the development of rules so that they feel personally invested in them. Further assistance to students can be provided by not only modelling pro-social behaviour, but by recognising and rewarding appropriate and responsible behaviour. For an ODD student, this involves not only modelling the appropriate behaviour, but also ignoring secondary poor behaviours and focusing strongly on identifying situations where the student made the right choice for behaviour and acted appropriately. It is a fact that many students do not enjoy school and have underdeveloped social skills. Accepting this, it is vital that a teacher develops a deeper understanding of problem students, of their background, attitudes and motivation. Such an understanding allows for a better balance of meaningful praise and correction. As a feature of student-centred behaviour management, teachers should strive to develop a trusting and cooperative relationship with students. A teacher can build trust with an ODD student by offering credibility through consistency in response, and some might suggest more importantly, authenticity. For example, freely admitting when you've made a mistake and having the ability to listen respectfully. An important aspect of this approach is also the creation of an optimal learning environment where a student feels their basic needs are met. This not only includes the quality of the student-teacher relationship, but also the physical layout of the classroom. In managing an ODD student, having and maintaining eye contact and being able to provide clear and straightforward instruction is crucial. A classroom seating plan should therefore be developed whereby the student is placed within the instructional focus. To reiterate a previous point, as per Standard 1 of the Australian Professional Standards, teachers must differentiate teaching to meet the needs of students with differing abilities as well as disabilities. ODD students must therefore be given differentiated instruction tailored to them. This could be achieved through the development of independent learning plans. Finally, as noted by Bloom, dysfunctional, restless and low motivation will return periodically to many students, irrespective of the number of rewards or sanctions they receive. With that in mind, in developing and implementing a plan to promote task engagement and best educational outcomes for an ODD student, I would allow a considerable amount of time, in this instance an entire term of 10 weeks. This would allow both the student and the teacher to cooperatively get to grips with the new structure to be put into place. Importantly, it allows time for feedback to be collected, data to be analysed, and approaches varied and balanced, as fitting both the needs of the student and the teacher, as is a key feature of the person-centred approach to behaviour management. It should be noted that this plan has been developed for a primary school age class. The plan would be broken into 4 phases. The intention of the first phase is to lay the groundwork prior to term commencing. As noted earlier, like much else in the classroom, appropriate behaviour must be taught. Therefore, the remaining 3 phases are identified in the same manner as I would approach a lesson plan. That is, an orientation, enhancing and synthesising phase. The first phase of the plan would commence before the term had in fact started. Firstly, the whole rationale, approach and expected outcomes would need to be discussed with and approved by my supervising teacher and likely also with the school principal. In addition, I would make use of the advice and resources of any specialist school or department staff available in the school or within the district, for example counsellors or psychologists. Before implementing the behaviour management plan, a teacher would need to be cognizant of any formal assessment of diagnosis, as well as any particular or special background circumstances. This not only prevents easily preventable, but potentially devastating errors in developing the strategies to be employed, but also allows the teacher to appreciate the student's background so as to better be able to develop a cooperative and trusting relationship with the ODD student. To that end, I would also endeavour to meet and discuss the proposed behaviour management plan with the student's parents or carers. Also important is the need to discuss the rationale and plan with the student themselves. It is an important part of the cognitive behaviouralist and PBS approach that students be made aware of their own behaviours and the cognitions behind them. It is vital that a student does not feel that this behaviour plan is forced upon them, but that it is to make school more relevant to them. In terms of other groundwork, the physical layout of the classroom should be arranged to give the ODD student the best opportunity to make good behaviour choices. To that end, a seating plan would be developed so that the student is always in eye contact with the teacher, that they have free and easy access to class resources and stations, and that they are not sat with too many students. The second phase of the behaviour management plan, that is the orientation phase, begins day 1 of term and extends for 2 to 3 weeks. Firstly, a code of conduct is developed with input from all students, with a focus on the ODD student. This code must be clear and straightforward, with as few individual rules as possible. This allows the student to take some sense of ownership in these rules and promotes the notion that they belong to the class community. Next, proactive strategies would be developed to help the student recognise their own cognition and linking physiological responses. We would identify together the student's behaviour triggers and discuss the emotional and physiological responses that had previously escalated behaviour episodes. From these data, both the student and I could develop a pre-arranged system of cues, both visual and verbal, that both myself as well as the student can use to identify when behaviours had been triggered. It is important that this be a two-way street. Allowing the student to give instant behavioural feedback to the teacher in a positive or appropriate manner, or at least in a way that is not inappropriate, will give the student the tools they need to identify appropriate and positive behaviours that they can then choose to exhibit. The student and I would also develop mechanisms to de-escalate a behaviour episode. An ODD student must be allowed avenues to alter and divert their own behaviour. The student and I would also develop a pre-arranged and importantly non-consequence exit, so the student can remove themselves physically should they be unable to arrest escalation. It is also vital at this early stage that secondary behaviour be ignored, except of course where class or the student's own safety are at risk. It is vital in the orientation phase that all the behaviour recognition strategies and de-escalation mechanisms are reinforced. The student must know you are sincere in this plan. It helps build trust, moving the foci of the relationship away from one of authority and power, to which the ODD student is fundamentally at odds with. The third phase of this plan, the enhancing phase, would involve the student learning to apply positive behaviours whilst actively engaging with teaching and learning. This phase would run from between weeks 3 to 8. An individual learning plan would need to be developed, allowing heavily for differentiated instruction and resources for the ODD student. I will discuss and include topics of interest of the student to promote ownership of their learning and to encourage engagement. Assessment would also need to be varied to best allow them to demonstrate learning. In addition to this, and in aligning with a person or student-centred approach to behaviour management, I would also phase in instructional pedagogy. The ODD student would be encouraged to participate in class and group inquiry, but not forced into it. Heading into weeks 3 and 4, the ODD student would be then paired or put into a small group of 3 students, allowing for support and peer assessment. But their partners would be selected very carefully, based on their prior relationship with the student. In terms of feedback on the plan's progress, the student would meet with me weekly to discuss positive achievements and reflect on any poor behaviour decisions made. By week 5, it may also be prudent to schedule a meeting with parents' carers to discuss progress. A teacher should strive to focus on the positive behaviours and progress so far made. A student should not feel that their classroom relationship with the teacher is dependent upon parent or carer approval. However, they should be made aware that positive behaviour in a classroom can lead to positive consequences outside it. The final phase, the synthesising phase, would have the student and myself making use of the relationship built over the term to reflect upon our achievements. Again, the focus must be positive and highlight those situations and scenarios where the student has chosen appropriate behaviours, especially in situations that would have been previously challenging for the student. Ultimately, this final phase, at the end of term, is meant to be a way of moving into the subsequent term. In essence, the behaviour management plan is ongoing, not just not in such a formal way. Long-term mechanisms for feedback and support have been established and nurtured. These should be continued to further support the student make positive and appropriate behaviour choices. An important part of the action plan strategy is the keeping of relevant data. To that end, an ongoing professional journal must be kept. Within this would be included incidents of poor behaviour, incidents of the use of tools and mechanisms for de-escalation, particular incidents of extremely appropriate and positive behaviour choices. The student is also to be made very well aware that I am keeping this journal and that there is nothing inside that journal that they cannot see. This transparency is vital in building cooperation and trust. In dealing with challenging behaviour students, trust is key. In critically analysing this plan, I shall first focus upon its weaknesses. Firstly, this plan might require several terms or the majority of a year in which to run. Some students may respond quickly, others might require more time. The plan developed here assumes a best-case scenario for the ease of presenting the plan, its rationale and resources. Individual situations and students would of course mean alteration as required. Also, this plan requires that the teacher gain a solid understanding of the background of the student. Should parents or carers be disinterested or hostile to this approach, then it would make the job of establishing teacher-student trust that much more difficult. Furthermore, should a principal or outside agency, for example a counsellor or caseworker, be unwilling or unsupportive, the plan is unlikely to achieve all that it could. Another potential drawback is the assumption that there is a single student requiring such attentions. Whilst this plan could be run concurrently for 2, maybe even 3 students as an absolute stretch, a teacher, especially a new graduate teacher, would be unlikely to implement such a scheme should there be a large cohort of students requiring targeted behaviour management plans. In this instance, another strategy would need to be developed. The big positive is that this plan fits closely with the whole school PBS system currently employed by many schools across Australia. This plan simply takes elements and principles of PBS and utilises them to target a particular student with their particular challenging behaviour. It would be surprising if this plan met with considerable opposition from a school's executive. Also, this plan could be worked or reworked for other students presenting with challenging behaviours, especially passive-aggressive students. Although aspects of this plan, especially the strategies for identifying behaviour triggers and de-escalating mechanisms, could be implemented with students presenting with conduct disorder, Their behaviours are often so extreme that a great deal more support from outside the classroom would be necessary for such a student. Another plus is the way that the plan has been outlined. A beginning teacher would be familiar with the three-phase structure of a lesson plan and what the aim of each is. This then is an easily transferable idea to implement the behaviour management plan as developed here. Also, the results are transferable. The teacher in the synthesising phase can utilise data accrued to identify where behaviour modification has taken place and reflect on which strategies were effective and subsequently apply them in another scenario or with another student. Another big positive of the plan, especially for an already stretched public school, is the financial cost. It requires a lot of reading, but not a lot of money. Although it does involve considerable planning in order to differentiate teaching and resources, these can be reutilised at a later time. Finally, as Brookfield notes, 10 years of practice can be 1 year's worth of distorted experience repeated 10 times. As a teacher, even a beginning one, if I did not reflect on the effectiveness of my strategies in the classroom, then I cannot say that I am giving my students the best chance to access learning. Brookfield's quote forces me to reflect that I must be open to alternative perspectives to maintain best pedagogical practice. I must be prepared to challenge my assumptions to achieve the best for my students. In relation to the action research cycle, as proponents such as Barry have put forward, I found it a good way to generally structure a social science research activity. Walking through the steps definitely helped me guide my thinking in developing a strategy to develop and promote task engagement and better outcomes from an ODD student. Nonetheless, I did find it open to the same criticisms mentioned previously, as had been levelled against PBS methodologies generally, that the data collected, that is, observations on behaviour, could indeed be open to personal beliefs and outside variance. This is, however, something I cannot test the veracity of, as I've never implemented this plan. But to be a truly critically reflective teacher, I must be prepared to challenge my assumptions on the data if I was to collect it, should I ever implement this plan. I have no reason currently to believe that the plan would limit the potential benefits to the targeted student. Its value lies in the fact that it attempts to deal with an important social justice issue. As Churchill and others note, discovering inequalities and facing them with an eye towards changing them is at the heart of critically reflective practice. This is indeed at the heart of my plan. The ultimate aim is to provide the optimal access to and equity of teaching and learning. By applying this plan, a teacher would be reflecting on their pedagogy, their methods of differentiation, as well as the nature of the relationship with their students, all in order to maximise access and equity. This is a truly good aim. Thank you for your time.